Hey everybody, Brayden here. Welcome back to the Road to Chess Mastery. Today we are going to be looking at tournament number 10 and we're looking at game number 1 in this tournament. I was playing with the white pieces versus Raymond. This is a rematch, if you guys remember. I played Raymond as well with the white pieces and I got a overwhelmingly winning position and I ended up blundering and losing that game. So that was very unfortunate because when you have a gradually winning position and it's not even like a back and forth, it's just winning and then lost. It messes up your psyche a little bit. So I'm really hoping to come out on top this time, but we will have to see what happens, of course. I played e4, and this time we see c5. So normally Raymond would play e5, at least that was the one other game I had experience with them. So c5 is new. However, of course, I am happy to play against c5 because if you play e4, you have to prepare against c5, which is the Sicilian. You have to prepare against the French, the move e5 as well, c6, d5. There's a lot of moves you have to prepare against, so it can get a little crazy, but there's a lot to look at. Anyway, c5, knight to f3, and d6. Here I ended up playing d4, so going through main lines as this is what I had studied. I had only studied main lines up to this point, and a6 bishop g5. So pretty much what I would do is whenever I got into a position, I would say, okay, if I'm curious about this move, what should I play? And normally I would just play the top move, play whatever is like the most frequent. The issue with this is although you're playing the best moves in the position, or theoretically most challenging moves, the thing is your opponents have definitely seen these moves as well, and they likely have something prepared against you. So if you're only following along with the main moves and also not trying to understand why they're being played, you can run into a lot of problems, and we will see this in this game. Here we see e6, f4, bishop e7, and queen to f3. And now we see a deviation from mainline theory. Normally you'll see queen c7, castles long, knight bd7, g4, b5. This is the most popular line. However, my opponent decided to castle. And this position is a lot different from regular games. And after long castles and queen c7, what I should do here is play a move like queen to g3. Where after queen to g3, a move like knight h5 looks like it's scary, but after queen h4, you're really just asking why do you move that knight there. If g6, well, you're just begging for f5 to be played. The position's going to be completely opened up and black's nearly lost. But here, I played g4, and again, queen to g3 was definitely best. Trying to go for an e5 push, and play would continue. Like this is still anyone's game. Maybe a bishop d3, knight f3 back, going for e5, and trying to open up the bishop on h7. Just principled play. But instead I went for g4 because this was a normal idea in the Sicilian, and I thought this had to be good, right? They just castled into the attack. I can just take and play at g5 and just play like you play a normal game, except they castled and they're just down the move because they didn't play knight bd7. However, this was actually not the case. And the reason is b5. And my opponent immediately saw this because, well, it's also a normal move to play and it should be played. The whole point is this diagonal is actually extremely weak for me now. And you might be asking, why is it weak now when it wouldn't be weak if they didn't castle? That's a very good question. And it's one that is very confusing to me to this day. But the whole point is I truly believe that you haven't committed the knight on b8 yet. After castling, and there might be ideas of b4 and knight to c6, and d5 is also an idea in the position, and it's a lot easier to achieve when your king has been castled and g4 was played, because if d5 and this diagonal opens, that definitely favors black, as well two of my major pieces are on this diagonal, whereas they just move their bishop there, and that could be very bad for me. I ended up playing h4. I was just thinking, hey, you know what, I'm just going to ignore this. This shouldn't be an issue. Just play h4, take, and play g5, f5, and I should be okay. I should have an advantage. Boy, was I wrong. Definitely in this position, I am worse, and bishop b7 is a clear indicator of that. where d5, even e5, for example, can be a huge problem. But this is where my position gets even worse, unfortunately. I'm playing on the right side of the board, but here it doesn't really make too much sense because this g4 move was actually, again, too weakening for this diagonal, which is very counterintuitive for these positions. So I don't really blame myself too much for missing this idea. But after bishop takes, and g5, now we can see that either I'm doing amazing if they move away, for example, bishop e7 or bishop d8. I should actually be doing quite well. f5 and f6 are coming, and I have a good position. But they took on d4, and this really surprised me because, well, they just won the bishop pair, and then they gave it up. And, well, that should be counterintuitive, right? It's a Sicilian, so Sicilians are known for being very open positions, although this isn't technically open right now. This had to be good for my opponent. But it turns out bishop takes d4, bishop takes d4 had to be good for me. But it turns out that this is actually amazing for my opponent. Where after rook takes d4, the problem is they are just developing all their pieces into the attack, and this diagonal is still a problem. Now we see that g4 is just a huge mistake in this line. Where after knight to c6, rook to d1, realistically what should be played at some point is e5. The whole point is they can bring that knight to d4, and they're covering the d5 square with their bishop. It's a very surprising move, but d4 is so much more valuable than d5 in this position. Rook a to c8, so they're just preparing possible b4 and maybe a knight to d4, for example. So I have to be very careful of that. And that's when I decided to go rook d2. And funnily enough, I remember in the game thinking I should go rook d2 here, but I thought that was too fancy, and I don't know why. I just convinced myself not to play it. I spent like a good 5-10 minutes thinking rook d1 or rook d2. Yeah, 5 minutes on one move. Okay, you have a lot of time in these games, so I thought it was an important thing. But I played rook to d1 for some reason, even though rook d2. Again, I'm still much worse. It just makes more sense to go rook d2 because then after rook c8, you don't have to waste another move. But even here, a move like bishop to d3 might even be necessary, and if you have to say a move like this is necessary, that's quite sad, where it does cover the c2 square, but you can't play e5 and queen h5 because you're just too slow in this position. But okay, rook d2, I'm definitely worse. Now we see queen a5, and I played a3. I think a3 is just not really in the spirit of the position, but it's hard to play any other move. Maybe king b1. The scary thing is, well, this knight's pinned, right? So it feels like there has to be something in the air, something like this, for example, where after I move my knight, then b3 is possible, for example, and I'd have to move back, something like this. But this is absolutely something I don't want to get into, because it just looks like I just gave my opponent a bunch of free moves. So I thought a3 was necessary. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't, but either way, my position is very, very bad here. My opponent played b4, which is what you should be playing in this position. And my whole point was knight b1. Okay, you know what? You played b4, but maybe I can get in some sort of queen takes a3 and force a trade of some sort, and maybe I won't actually be doing that bad. Now we see d5, and I think this is where things start going south for my opponent. Instead, e5 was a lot stronger, just going for knight to d4, as I mentioned before, because d5 isn't really an issue for them. And d5, although it's the characteristic break, it's what you want to play, surprisingly, it makes a lot more sense to just go e5. But okay, d5, I was very scared of this move because after takes, there's knight e7, and this is what I didn't want to see. The whole point is now they're just going to recapture back, and I have no way to defend or anything, so they're going to be able to capture back, and there's going to be problems along this diagonal. They're going to get way too much activity. I thought this was just something I could not allow. And I think I was right in that assessment. So I played bishop to g2. Again, not much you can do here. Knight e7, a takes b4, queen takes b4, and queen to a3. I thought this was a really nice trick. It does actually force the trade of queens here because their knight is undefended. So I thought this was probably the best bet. The whole point is, sure, they had a lot of initiative, but now they don't have an initiative. And although I might be losing a pawn, there's still hope in the position. I ended up playing f5, knight to f4, going for the bishop, and here we can see even in this position, they still have an initiative. For example, taking on d5, takes, and bishop takes. And I'm losing the exchange. In this type of position, I'm losing the game as well. This is just hopeless. But okay, knight to f4. I played rook to f2, and I'm sure you guys already saw what's wrong with that. Realistically, what I should have done was maybe a rook f1, where after takes, maybe an f6, and it's still playable. I should be worse, but I'm down a pawn. There's still rooks on the board. It's an imbalance, so I can still hope, and it's a doubled pawn as well. So, you know, maybe there's always chances to hold in these positions, but you never really know. Unfortunately, maybe rook c5. Yeah, it's just not a fun position to get into, but it's always something that can be considered. Anyways, it's a lot better than what happened in the game with rook to f2. Very upsetting move. I knew I was worse, but at this point, rook f2 just loses. Where again, if I just play a simple move like rook to f1, then there's still chances to hold. But after rook f2, my opponent sees the idea. Knight to d3. This pawn is actually pinned because the rook is attacking my king if I won't move the pawn. So unfortunately, I lose the rook, and this of course will lose the game. So that was a very unfortunate loss and a very unfortunate way to start the tournament. What can you do? What happens happens, but I was very upset, very sad. I cry. No. Yeah, it's unfortunate, but you know, what happens happens. This is actually one of the biggest reasons why I stopped playing the Sicilian nowadays, and I pretty much haven't gone back to it since. So the only things I really know about the Sicilian are like the Najdorf defense and maybe like the Grand Prix. I studied a little bit of that, but yeah, I thought that would be an interesting piece of information to add. Soon after this, maybe 1 or 2 tournaments after this, I eventually decided to retire the Sicilian as black. Yeah, surprising. I actually retired it as black when I was playing white. The whole point was I was just so tired of these crazy lines, and it was always so confusing, and I just wanted to play to what I was strong at, which was small, minute advantages. But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this, and I will see you in game 2 again of tournament 10. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you then.